I'm not getting sworn in.
Well, it's six,
Right.
it's 6 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. Notice of an open work session of the City Council of the City of North Kansas City, Missouri, April 18th, 2017. Eric.
Good evening, sir. Thank you. Tonight's work session regards water sewer rate study that we have had done and that you'll get a report on tonight, and then staff would be looking for some direction if you're ready to provide it tonight regarding the setting of water and sewer rates in the next year. So as you may recall, at the council work session of June 7th, 2016, the council determined that the city should plan to renovate the city's water treatment plant per a study that was performed for us by Burns and McDonald's engineers at an estimated cost of about $13.7 million, plus perhaps a new lime feed system at a future time, a few years later, if necessary, if determined necessary after the first phase had been completed, at an estimated cost of about $3.6 million. So options for financing that substantial piece of work would include funding it entirely through the gaming fund, with no payback of the gaming fund by water customers through increased water rates, or lending the money for the project from the gaming fund and repaying the gaming fund completely over a period of years through increased water rates, or perhaps some combination of the two. Staff's been going on the assumption that we would not, in any case, issue a bond for this, which is how most cities would do it. Most cities don't have available the funds to fund such a project all at one time. But we do because of the gaming fund, and so our assumption would be, unless you were to tell us otherwise, that we would use the gaming fund in one fashion or another to at least provide the initial financing, and then perhaps repay it, perhaps not, or perhaps repay it in part. We did recommend to you at that time that before proceeding with the design stage of the water treatment plant renovation, that we have a rate study performed to determine the best option to pursue for financing this project. And at this meeting of November 15th, 2016, the City Council entered into an agreement with Raftalis Financial Consultants Incorporated to perform a study of future water and sewer rates under different scenarios, which we'll talk about tonight. And those consultants are here tonight to present their findings. And the study results are now presented to you for your review and discussion. So some of the scenarios that were considered. As I noted, I think there has been, we've detected a consensus view on the council that we would like to continue to operate our own water treatment plant, produce our own water, rather than decommissioning that plant and purchasing water wholesale from the city of Kansas City, Missouri, which is an option that's available. But we understand that that's probably not the way that the council was inclined to go. But we did think it would be prudent to look at what that option would cost compared to the option of renovating the plant, just to make sure that we had all the facts before us as we made a decision. Both of these options assumed that we would have a minimum, we would operate in the Raftalis study, that we would operate with a minimum balance equal to 3 months of operations. We would maintain that in the water fund, and that the capital projects that are shown in attachment A would be funded except for those that might not be needed if you pursued one option or another. So in attachment B in the memo that was provided in your packet is a spreadsheet or a chart that summarizes the various options that Raftalis examined for addressing the city's long-term water needs. And the summary shows that even at the least, with the least expensive option for ratepayers, having the gaming fund without any payback, pay the necessary capital expenses to decommission the plant and construct infrastructure that would be necessary to get to Kansas City and have them service. Even the least expensive of those is more expensive than any scenario that involves renovating our water treatment plant and continuing to produce city water. So looking at that, it's not labeled attachment B, but it is labeled water rate scenarios. And what I'm referring to on that attachment is the fourth line down, which says buy water from Kansas City, Missouri, and do not repay gaming fund. and renovate water treatment plant and pay gaming fund back 100%. So, as I said, that it comes out, and the consultant would be happy to talk to you further, that it is a more economical option to proceed with renovating our plant, and we are assuming that that is the way that you would like to proceed, and the rest of our analysis tonight will go based on that assumption. So the Raftles study did look at a number of different scenarios for how this might be financed. They include the gaming fund lending money and being repaid completely with a 3% interest, or being repaid completely without interest, or being repaid 50% with 3% interest, or not being repaid at all. And of course, there are lots of other permutations, but those are the ones that they looked at. And there is information comparing those different options, again, in attachment B. Attachment C is a gaming fund, long-term outlook. I gave you one of these back when we looked at the budget last year for the fiscal year 17, and I did a new one for tonight's meeting, in which we try to estimate as best we can, and conservatively, meaning assuming more expenditures rather than assuming fewer, what our gaming fund outlook might look like through 2022, and assuming, just so you could see what it would look like, that the gaming fund would pay for the project in its entirety without payback. And this analysis shows that this forecast that the gaming fund balance would dip to about $12,600,000 at the end of fiscal year 2019, with the figures shown in here, and then it would begin to rebound after that. So if you wished to have the gaming fund fund this project in its entirety without payback, we do believe the gaming fund could do that. We think that we've accounted for all of the Armour Road redevelopment area expenditures that we expect over the next few years, and I've tried, as I said, to be conservative and estimate capital expenditures in other departments. So this is the best estimate that we can come up with, and it would seem to show that you could do that if you wish to. So that's kind of setting the stage for the analysis that our consultants did, and at this time I'd like to introduce Tom Beckley of Raftles, who will go through some of their findings regarding rates and forecasts.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to review with you the financial forecasts and the CIP that we use to develop a projected rate, what we would call proposed rate increases, because we are going to present, scenarios related to, what's being recommended based on our discussions with city staff. Of course, as Eric mentioned, there are many other scenarios that could be considered, especially on the water side, with regards to how we want to fund the water treatment plant improvements. Just to refresh your memory, because you may not all have the rate structures committed to memory, basically for the water and sewer funds. For the water fund, we have a fixed monthly charge, which ranges from $19.31 for a 5/8 inch meter up to $4,367 if you have a large 10-inch meter, which would be a very large commercial customer. And then we charge a per 1,000-gallon charge for that base charge includes the first 3,500 gallons of water usage for each customer as well. And then for volume charge, we have volume charge that declines. The more you use, the lower the volume rate is. So the first 10,000 is $1.51 per thousand, and then it declines slightly with each block. And basically, that declining water rate structure is meant to recognize that typically the customers that are using more are larger commercial customers and industrial customers, and so they incur less cost because of the pattern of usage that they have. And that's a pretty standard methodology in the industry, although you see it less and less these days, but it's still accepted in an appropriate way to charge water in the case of North Kansas City. On the wastewater side, we have similar structure with a base charge, and then we have a per 1,000-gallon charge of $4, and we'll talk more about that. And there's no block rate structure on the wastewater side, which again is a pretty common practice in the industry because you can't justify differences in volume rates like you can for water. So first, we actually want to talk about wastewater. So we're going to take a look at wastewater first, and then we'll talk about water. When we look at the overall financial plan for wastewater, what we find is that we need some pretty healthy rate increases over the next few years based on our projections. But what's important to recognize about the wastewater utility is that we purchase our wastewater treatment services from the city of Kansas City. And there's actually a line on this chart about 2/3 of the way down that shows total revenue requirements, and then that line labeled KCMO share, that is the percentage of our revenue requirements that basically we pay directly to Kansas City, Missouri for treatment services. So you can see in the current year we're in, 2/3 of the budget for the wastewater utility is basically what we pay Kansas City, Missouri for treatment services. So what's important to recognize is basically our rate increases in the coming years are almost completely driven by rate increases that Kansas City, Missouri has indicated that they will be passing on to all wholesale customers they provide service to and their own retail customers. As most of you are probably aware, Kansas City, Missouri is implementing improvements to their sewer system. They have a combined sewer system in the heart of the city, basically from the river down to the plaza roughly, is all combined sewer. And what we mean by combined sewer is it has stormwater and sanitary sewer in the same system. And the EPA is directing all utilities that have such a setup that they need to eliminate combined sewer overflows. When they built that system, basically they said, when it rains a lot, we understand that you're not going to be able to handle that and you have to dump it into rivers. And that was allowed when those systems were built, but the EPA has changed the rules, so all utilities that have systems like that, which Kansas City is hardly unique in that respect, are basically having to make improvements to basically, they're supposed to eliminate combined sewer overflows, ultimately is the goal. And so in Kansas City's case, that's going to cost billions of dollars of improvements to the combined sewer system, which is going to be shared by all their customers. Now, over the past couple of years, we haven't seen quite the increases because when they first announced this several years ago, they were saying that it's going to be about 10% annual rate increases for the foreseeable future. North Kansas City, actually, I've discussed this with staff, we actually received notification of our rate increase for the coming year because they increased their rates on May 1st, I believe it is. And so for the coming year, our rates only went up 7.5% this year. But we expect at some point in the future, those rate increases will get even larger than that as they actually start construction of the assets that they need to basically make these changes that are mandated by the EPA. So you can see the effect of this is by 2024, we're projecting that actually 80% of the sewer budget in 2024 will be only the charges we pay Kansas City. So in other words, we have very little control. It's not like you can turn to city staff and say, you've got to cut costs, because they don't really have any control over the costs that are a bulk of the costs in the sewer utility. So, and what's being recommended this year, as Eric mentioned, is in the past, when you did your last rate increase, you actually implemented 5 years of increases. But based, on discussions with city staff, what they're asking for now is that they want to look at this every year so that they'll be able to more exactly kind of reflect what's really occurring based on what Kansas City gives us each year and not just have to make a projection what we think they're going to give us in terms of rate increases. So right now, we believe that approximately 10% a year increase will be needed for a few years. And then you see these increases actually go up to 12 and then 14%, but that's based on the fact that Kansas City has indicated their increases may get as large as 15% a year, which is what is driving that. So these are certainly larger increases than we would like, but obviously the point I'm trying to make is, unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of control over this. Several years ago, the city of North Kansas City made a lot of improvements to improve inflow and infiltration in the sewer system. And we've done what we can for the most part to limit how much is getting into the sewer system and how much we're sending to Kansas City for treatment. But ultimately, what they're charging us is we can't control that, and we can only do our best to control our own costs. But a lot of the rate increases we're going to see are going to be a result of that. So that's not the right slide. So in terms of the wastewater capital improvement plan, there's not a lot of improvements that need to be made on the wastewater side. So you'll see here that we're projecting, about $200,000 to $300,000 per year of capital improvements, basically just to maintain the system, to provide reliable service. Because, as I mentioned, the city of North Kansas City actually undertook a large project to reline all the sewer system just a few years ago. So there's not a lot of reinvestment that needs to be made. So again, this is not what's driving the rates, but we just wanted to show you kind of what's included in here in terms of the improvements that we need to make. So it's really just kind of emergency repairs and just basic repairs that need to be made to maintain the system in the condition it's in. So ultimately, you know, with the projections that I showed you on that wastewater financial plan, this year we're proposing a 10% rate increase for fiscal year 2018, and then 10% for the following. We believe it may be about 10% for the following 2 years, and then 12, and then 14. But again, that is highly dependent on the rate increases that Kansas City actually ends up implementing. So those are speculative, but this gives you an idea of where we believe rates would go if that was to occur. And I'll, in this slide, I think, you know, I showed you a big table of rates, but this is really the heart of it. What's a typical customer's bill? Sorry, I had to turn, and I guess I should just to stop for 1 minute. This is Joe Collins, by the way, with me, and he's an associate in our firm who has assisted me on this project. I should have introduced him before I started. I apologize for that. So a typical residential customer uses about 4,000 gallons per month in the city of North Kansas City. So this shows you what their bill would be, and you can see we've got two here labeled North Kansas City under current rates and then North Kansas City under the proposed 2018 rates. And we've compared it to some other communities in the area, some of the larger cities as well as some of the, you know, cities more comparable in size to the city of North Kansas City. And you can see right now our rates are second lowest among the communities we compared to, and even after the 10% increase, they'll still be, you know, in the middle and really kind of below average. If you were to average this all together, $28, and you can see they get pretty high. Liberty's at $49, and of course we know they just built a new sewage treatment plant to try to help control these costs. But, and then other communities are, you know, higher, and then the communities that are lower aren't typically a whole lot lower than where we're at.
Can I ask a question real quick on that?
Of course.
Did you look at any of the other gaming cities in your studies?
We did not. Just thinking, of course, well, Kansas City is a gaming city. Riverside's a little unique because I believe Riverside's sewer system is actually operated by Kansas City, I believe.
And yeah, I think that's right. And then they use, on the water side, they use American Water.
Okay.
And then I believe that would be it on the Missouri side. Those would be the three cities with casinos, right? Kansas City, North Kansas City, and because there's two in Kansas City, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So on water, in terms of the overall water financial plan, especially, you know, based on discussion with city staff, what we have in here, what I have in the presentation is the financial plan for, based on discussion with city staff, what they felt would be the most attractive option to council. And of course, as Eric mentioned, this is in particular the one area where we're looking for direction from council tonight, which is what do you want to do in terms of kind of repayment to the gaming fund. You know, we've basically, the direction we were given is we assume no matter what, the money would come from the gaming fund. But what would happen? Would we pay that back? Because obviously the gaming fund has money, so even if the water utility needs money and they were going to pay it back, why not just borrow it from the gaming fund and pay the interest to the gaming fund instead of bondholders? Plus, you don't have to go through the expense of a debt issue then, which also saves some additional money for the ratepayers of North Kansas City. And based on discussion with Eric and Shirley and Pat, you know, ultimately, you know, they felt that the direction you might want to go in is to have basically no repayment to the gaming fund. So based on the current rates, we believe that the utility can be self-sufficient for the foreseeable future if the gaming fund provides the funding for the plan improvements over the next several years. That includes the one coming up in the next year or two, as well as the lime feed system that may be needed in a few years. You can see, so in the financial plan, you'll see there's actually gaming fund repayment for a previous loan that the gaming fund made to the water utility that they are paying back with interest now. So overall, you can see that we project that the water utility, assuming that were to occur with the gaming fund loan for the plan improvements, that they would generate surpluses for the next several years, and ultimately, right now, based on projections, they would need rate increases at least for 7-8 years. And this includes, you know, escalation to O&M expenses and other expenses we need, as well as a capital improvement plan. So in terms of the capital improvement plan on the water side, it's pretty moderate capital improvements here. Working with Pat and Shirley, we developed, what we believed was a reasonable capital improvement plan to make sure that we could continue to deliver safe and reliable water service to the citizens of North Kansas City. So you can see there's $100,000 a year in here for emergency water repairs and then various other expenses that they felt were appropriate, and these are similar to what are currently budgeted. In years where we don't have large plan improvements, basically we're looking at $200,000 to $300,000 per year. And then, of course, basically right now, the projection right now is for the water plant renovation that's needed in the next couple of years. That would be about $14 million. And then the projection for the lime feed system, if that's needed, would be about $3.6 million in 2022. You can see, of course, this does not include, there's a line item in here, but it doesn't include the line to the KCMO plant. That's the option that Eric mentioned to you that we certainly looked at. When we were hired, we were asked to, consider, before we made almost $20 million and $18 million improvements in the water treatment plant, doesn't make sense to connect to the Kansas City plant that's right there on the border of our city. And we've actually worked with Kansas City on other projects before, so, we were given permission from city staff to kind of talk to them and feel, kind of say, hey, what kind of rate could you give the city of North Kansas City, recognizing that we would be slightly different service than most other customers they serve, because we said we will come to your plant, get the water, so that you don't need to worry about the cost of any transmission, distribution, anything else. It's really what's the cost to produce water. But ultimately, the rate they proposed was so high that it didn't, when we looked at it, in addition to the cost of making the connection to their plant, it just wasn't even it was significantly higher than even the option if the water system pays back the entirety of the gaming fund loan with interest. So that's why we felt that wasn't a realistic option. So ultimately, we've got the table in here. Water rates kind of comparable to the wastewater rates, but ultimately what we're proposing right now for the foreseeable future is that these wouldn't change over time for the foreseeable future. So this is a similar chart. Again, it's one thing to look at a big table of water rates, but what does it really mean for people's bills, and how does it compare to what other communities are paying? So right now, North Kansas City is at about $20.82. It is at $20.82 for a customer using 4,000 gallons, which is a typical residential bill in the city of North Kansas City. And you can see that's currently the lowest among all those same communities that we looked at in the metro that we felt was comparable. So obviously our water bill is pretty reasonable, and I would expect over the next 5 to 6 years, most of these communities will have to raise their rates, unlike what we're projecting will be needed by the city of North Kansas City if you pursue this option in terms of funding the capital improvements. Now, of course, the real question is, when people talk about their water bill, they're not really talking about just their water bill. Usually what they really mean is their water and sewer bill. And this is what most customers really kind of focus on. And so when we look at what our combined bill is relative to these communities, we'll see that our combined water bill, again, for residential customer using about 4,000 gallons per month. Currently, they pay $47.19, and with the proposed rate increase, that would be $49.04 next year. So you can see, even though the 10% number certainly is scary on the sewer side, that seems like that's a pretty big percentage increase. But ultimately, what we're talking about on the combined water and sewer bill for the coming year for a typical residential customer is less than a $2 increase on their bill. And you can see again, that's Blue Springs is a little lower. Everybody else that we looked at is higher. And of course, some of these may not have rate increase. They may still raise their rates yet this year. So that's the end of the presentation that I prepared, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of the analysis we did or any other facets of the study we did. And I think Eric has some closing comments.
I just wanted to follow up on the analysis, and then we'll all be open for questions. So as Tom noted, it gets to what now then do we do in terms of setting water and sewer rates, at least for the coming year. And in the staff recommendation is that you consider having the gaming fund finance it completely without repayment. Choosing another position would be a perfectly reasonable way to go, saying, hey, we did hear from Councilmember Stewart, the mayor and I did, and he said, I won't be at the meeting tomorrow night, but I'd kind of like everybody to know that I think water customers ought to pay for this water improvement. And that's a perfectly reasonable position to take and say, hey, we don't want to use the gaming fund for that purpose. We want to make sure we have sufficient gaming funds for other things. The reason that I have recommended this particular recommendation to you is just because of those really high sewer rates that Tom talked about. I think comparatively, we'll probably always be better than other cities because they'll also be facing, well, if they were on Kansas City sewer, then they will also be facing higher rates. But because just thinking in terms of, in absolute terms, looking at those really high sewer rates, my thought was whatever can be done to keep the overall water sewer rate as low as possible might be a way that you want to go. But as I say, you could go completely the other way and say, no, we will want water rates to take care of this water improvement, or you could pick some middle position. But as I've noted earlier, the gaming fund, it would seem, is capable, if you wanted to have the gaming fund take care of it in its entirety, does seem capable of handling that expenditure. So that's an item that we'd like to have some discussion from you tonight, is to see if there's some consensus on the part of council. Going forward, we do recommend that we come to you every year and let you know where things seem to be in terms of both the water and the sewer funds, in terms of fund balance, in terms of expected expenditures, in terms of anticipated increases from Kansas City in the case of sewer, and have you set those each year. Because I think things can change from year to year, and so doing that gives you the maximum flexibility to do whatever you can to try to keep rates as low for our customers as you can, given what our needs are in any given year. For next year, we are recommending no increase in water based upon the gaming fund paying for this improvement in its entirety. If you go another way, you would need to increase water rates somewhat. And to cover the increase that we did get from Kansas City, which was about 7.5%, we're recommending a 7% increase in sewer rates. We have to have a public hearing anytime we raise sewer, so we would come to you for a formal vote sometime in the next couple of months, based upon some kind of consensus you may give us ahead of time. So that's where our recommendation is and where the analysis is, and be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
Zach?
Couple of quick questions. First of all, thank you to the consultant for coming in and giving this information. I think one of our benefits is that our water rates are lower than most cities. I don't know if that would help fuel economic development. We do have quite a few businesses that use a high amount of water. So if anything, I think, either we have the gaming fund fund it or we choose a middle ground. But if we can do anything to keep the water rates the way they are, that would be preferable. Obviously the sewer has to go up because we're relying on Kansas City for that. I do have a couple of questions on your gaming fund projections, and I don't know if you want those.
Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. One thing is, let me get to it here, Parks and Recreation.
Yes,
And
sir.
there is a operating cost, Parks and Recreation Library at the lower level.
Yes.
And we're showing the 32,000 throughout the, I guess it's a 5-year span.
Yes, sir.
The Parks and Rec are going to have their own building, and I think the council has indicated that we want them to be more self-sufficient. Is that your conservative estimate?
Yes, sir, it is.
So that
I
may
do
or
know
may
that
not
I do
be-
know that has been the previous council indication. I also know that the Parks Board would be interested in having that discussion with you one more time. In the interest of being conservative, I did show that, but that's an expenditure which, based upon council's decision,
Could be
may not
cut.
occur.
Okay. And the other one is on the trash hauling contract. Let's see, I think it's under Public Works.
Yes, sir.
And I know that it's flat on 259,000. Irregardless of what happens, don't we anticipate an increase in that each year?
There might be some inflationary increase, so it could have gone up by a few $1,000s in each year in this analysis. I didn't
Nothing
show it that way,
significant,
but another thing to consider, and I do think that now that we have accomplished through the help of our voters an additional source of revenue into the general fund, that we might consider moving that expenditure out of the gaming fund altogether.
Okay.
Because really the gaming fund, I've always felt, has not been the proper source for that particular
Sure.
item.
Okay.
So that's something that may well be proposing to you in the 2018 budget.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, sir.
I'm always pretty comfortable with staff's analysis with things. I think you folks do a great job in the due diligence you put forth, the people that you hire. You're not experts on a lot of this stuff, and you hire people that are. I would think that we should go along with the recommendations of staff about the gaming fund and the no payback on it. I think it might be a good idea, and I agree with Councilman Clevenger's thoughts about, I think it would improve to attract businesses and the amenities here in Northtown, residential people. They look at that and they think that we're a stable city and a good city to come to. So I would agree with that. That's all I have.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, as long as we can keep the water rates down for residents, it's a good thing. It does attract new business. The gaming fund originally, I mean, that's what the gaming fund is for. It's for capital improvements. And this is definitely a capital improvement. And we are fortunate enough to have that money. I think we should utilize it and continue to give the residents a break. And so it'd be the gaming pay with no payback. That's, well, I won't have a vote when it comes around, but that's my opinion.
I have a couple questions. Or are you first? So I just wondered on the wastewater, have we ever considered building our own wastewater plant? Is that like over the top, expensive, or?
Well, it would be. So at one time, and others here could better reflect the history than I could, but at one time, the city did have its own wastewater treatment plant. It's where the water pollution control building is now. And then I think 30-some years or so ago, the decision was made to instead send our sewage to Kansas City. So it goes out to the Buckeye Pump Station now, down 210, and then across the river. Yes, it would be extremely expensive. The city of Liberty just did this because they made a judgment that they did not want to be dependent upon Kansas City. They spent about $100 million, and of course they're a larger city than we are with a much larger population. It would be quite an undertaking for us at this time, I think, to construct our own wastewater treatment plant. Certainly we haven't considered anything like that since I've been here.
I was just curious as to the history of that. My other question is, or statement, I guess, is about the payments. So it's kind of a tough call because on the one hand, I agree with what the other council members have said about keeping rates low and not, we have the gaming fund for a reason. On the other hand, I get a little concerned, I want to make sure that that gaming fund is there for our children and our children's children. And so when you look down the road, I don't want to artificially keep rates low today and have other generations, pay for that. So I guess my thought is I would certainly be okay with looking at it every year and evaluating. I certainly like the idea of keeping the rates low. I would be open to a partial payback to the gaming fund.
Tom, did you? I kind of agree with Valerie that our water rates are pretty low, and I'd kind of like to see a payback on it, but I'd go either way. Do we need a vote on this, or? No, Fred? Fred.
I was just going to say, I like the idea of what the staff recommendation of paying for this project from the gaming fund without a payback. And that's what it's for.
Zach?
I tend to agree. I mean, the gaming fund is for capital projects, and if we're good stewards with the money, I think that we can finance that if we ever did, and I'm open to either way, but if we did, I just don't quite understand the interest paying back the gaming fund. It's all city money. I don't know if it would help if we didn't have an interest rate paying it back, but that's just, again, just my thought, but, we've got valid points on both sides, so.
I think if you funded it, if you used the gaming fund to fund the project in part, probably wouldn't necessarily make sense to charge an interest rate. But if you were inclined to have the gaming fund pay for it and be completely repaid, as our consultant noted, we have lent money from the gaming fund to the water fund before, and we are repaying that fund with interest, which is which is good practice, but it would be entirely a council decision. But if you're doing it in part, I don't know that you'd bother then tacking on a few points of
I kind of
increase.
view it as, it's a financial transaction. You're using that money today. If 3 years from now you were going to use that money, in theory, it would be worth
Right.
more. It's the time value of money. So, but I would imagine that's our call to decide to do that or not.
Exactly,
It's smart, but it doesn't mean it has to be done.
correct.
Well, what do you need?
Well, it doesn't sound like there's unanimity here, but I think we could maybe come back to you with a couple of alternate recommendations for you to consider at a future time and try to indicate what the financial implications of that are. But we probably would like to bring to you, we'd like to call a public hearing on the sewer side. Do we have it, can we talk about sewer? Are you in agreement with the recommendation to increase the sewer rate by 7%? Okay, well, that's easy then. So we would intend then to call for a public hearing as required with the necessary notice that's required. And I think that's 30 days, but I'm not, and come back to you here in a couple months. And at that time, we'll make a recommendation on water for you to consider as well. And then the one thing I'd say is that if you consider it each year, it gives you flexibility. At some point, if you're getting concerned about the gaming fund balance, you think it's getting too low, you can increase those rates on the water side and then use some of that rate increase to repay the gaming fund. So nothing that you might do right now is irrevocable.
I like the idea of meeting every year. We do that with the pension fund, with fire and police, and I think that's a good, solid practice to get into. Then we can reevaluate whatever decision we make.
Now, one thing that Shirley, finance manager, has suggested, we did do a 5-year plan, which is just ending this year. You did that back in 2013. And at least as a planning tool, we might put something out there. Sometimes when a city adopts a capital improvement program, for example, the first year is generally set in stone, and the 4 next years are planning years. But at least for particularly some of our large customers, it might at least be useful to show a projection of what rates might be without binding the council for more than 1 year at a time. So we might try to do that for you when we come back to you next.
If we just funded this through the gaming fund, there wouldn't be any water increase. We wouldn't have to go to a hearing or anything on
If you decided not, well, we still have to have a public hearing on sewer no matter what. That's,
Oh, the sewer,
for some reason, the state requires that in the case of sewer, though not necessarily in water. But if we increase rates in sewer, we do have to have a public hearing.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Any other questions for us or our consultant? Right. I think
We'll move to adjourn.
we have our direction. Pat, Shirley, did you have any? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?